So, how did the Discovering Buddhism modules, how did it actually start as a study program? Well, as many of you might have already known, fpmt as an organization started very organically. The first teachers who founded the organization are Lama Yeshe and late Lama Yeshe, and his main chief disciple Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who is now the spiritual head of the organization. So, of course, as an organization, it started by, there was, I guess, no plan initially to start an organization. They were just teaching as on request by people who had come to Nepal, and they were teaching from their, in-depth understanding, knowledge, and experience. And people gradually really started to take that to heart, and they wanted to have something that they could continue with with their understanding, with their practice and study of Buddhism in their own country. So that's how basically the fpmt organizations kind of like started to form, like initially from the teachings that the lamas gave in Nepal. People went back to their respective countries and started a small group of people who were in Nepal, initially just by people who, that met together in Nepal, and then they would start a small sort of group in their own home. And then slowly, as more people started getting interested, and then they invited the lamas, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, to give teachings in the West. And that's how they started traveling, the lamas started traveling. And this is how, as an organization, fpmt grew. And then as time went on, more and more interest was there in Buddhism, particularly in our tradition, Tibetan Buddhism. And of course, the Dalai Lama started to become very influential and started to widely travel and teach, as you may all very well know. And so very organically, that the centers started to form and became more established, like our own center here in Stockholm, Ishiningbo. Ishinobu Center originally was just a few people, like-minded people who came together as a small group, as a study group, but now we are actually. So when a center is established like this, as it has your own premises, then, and there are enough people who are interested, then it is natural that you want to have like a teacher who can present the Buddhist teachings. And because it was not possible for Lama Zopa before Lama Yeshe passed away, they were traveling extensively, and Lama Zopa also up until recently has been traveling extensively, but they cannot possibly cover every center and go to every country and stay for long periods. So therefore, as an ongoing study program for people who are interested in Tibetan Buddhism, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, of course, requested many teachers from the monasteries, Tibetan monasteries such as Sera, Kanben, and Drepung in India, to go and teach, to become resident teachers. And then, as more and more centers established, you couldn't find, the enough resources to have qualified geshis or teachers from the monasteries. So then, as Western students started to study and become interested, and as they became, integrated the practice in their own lives, they started to present the teaching. So that's how we now, at this present time, have an organization with both, traditional teachers, geshis, and lamas, but also Western students and who have studied extensively themselves and have then become registered teachers. And in my own case, yes, of course, I grew up in a Tibetan monastery, and so therefore naturally had influence of the teachings. I was not a very bright or very zealous student, so that's why I haven't become a scholar or a great, experienced teacher and scholar in that sense. But over the years, I first initially worked in a centers as a translator. So when I were translating for other masters, that's how you get a lot of information yourself, and you have to prepare for the classes. So that's when I, really started to hear more about how the Dharma is presented in the Buddhist world for Buddhist, for Western audiences. So, and personally, I started to take more interest of the real integration of the teachings in my own life when I started facing some difficulties in my life, some crises. That's when the teachings, that you've heard a lot on, and which otherwise may have remained as a theory, start to become like a necessity. You start to realize that these teachings, these wisdoms which are being passed down, is not just words. They can actually work, especially when you're having difficulties in life, you're facing some crises. Then from an initial just sort of like academic sort of level of hearing the teachings, then you can start to realize that it actually has an effect on your life when you integrate those teachings in your life. So I started to, take more personal interest in like meditation and understanding, especially when you have, as I said earlier, when you have started having a little bit of crises in life, you really begin to seek out any means possible to be able to help you to cope with difficulties in life. And so that's where personally I found that the teachings really had a practical approach, has a practical way of how it can help us in our lives. So, going back to how the Discovering Buddhism modules and this teaching program started in centers where they didn't have maybe a qualified, didn't have a Tibetan master teacher such as a Geshe. Western students who had studied from them could present the Dharma in a sort of essential basic structure. So this is where then our spiritual guide and spiritual head of our organization, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, came up with these topics, 13 specific topics of which take you from a basic understanding of Buddhism, from what you might have heard of or read a bit about, from a very basic understanding of Buddhism to leading one into the different sort of stages of understanding of the Buddhist whole, Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist psychology, and even like the aspect of cosmology. All of that in a essential sort of brief way can be presented in these 13 modules. So it was encouraged for centers to try to implement this as the interest of Tibetan Buddhism started to grow and people were interested. So therefore, Yeshe Nyingbo Center here is taking the opportunity with our, very good team of our director and SBC Zarina, who just introduced me earlier, and they've, taken upon themselves to really see how this can be implemented in the most effective way for people, for the needs of people in Stockholm, others who might join from otherwhere. So the Discovering Buddhism, what does the program consist of? It is 13 modules of topics which are studied as subjects. And then along with these topics, there's also, after each topic is completed, then we find a certain day where we can do like a retreat on it. So on the evening that the topics are presented, is presented in like a teaching, as a presentation from myself here. And I've always had a very easygoing approach where I present, but then if you can interject, and if you have not something that clear or you want to ask a question immediately, that's also fine. But we also give time to ask specific questions. So the actual time of each of our sessions here is 2 hours, basically from 6 to 8, with a 15-minute or so break for fika in between. So we, of course, always start with a short meditation just to settle down our mind. And then we do the presentation. And then, as I said earlier, sometimes we have a question or a discussion during and halfway through, maybe after the fika. And then the remaining presentation is offered after that. And then we always end with, again, a short meditation. So that is how each evening we start, regardless of what subject it may be. And then, but then, because there's not that much time to integrate what everyone has learned in their classes, because it's a presentation time, that is why the idea of doing sort of like a one-day retreat is being presented in this program, where after each module, and each module would be either at least I think 4 sessions, but some which are a little bit more in-depth topics have 5 or even up to 6 sessions. So usually most of the modules, most of each of the 13 modules are at least 4 sessions. So within that 4 sessions, we will cover the main topic of that area. And so the retreat, as I mentioned, I was trying to explain earlier, is a day where one has time to try to really put that into practice, try to meditate on. It'll be a guided meditation day where, just covering the main points of the topic that we covered, and then meditating and trying to integrate that in one's. And basically the study, how should you say, the approach to how the learning process from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is where it's like really based into 3 main aspects. They say the way that how we gain knowledge and understanding, and specifically in the spiritual context, how we get a deeper understanding, is first by listening to the teachings. So that means listen to the presentation, or if you don't have access to the teacher, then reading would be one way of getting that information. So the first is the listening or hearing the teachings, the presentation. The second, you gain a certain amount of understanding just by hearing. But then next is to contemplate, to think, to really analyze what you've heard and to see if it makes sense, and to try to use your own logic to at least whether to evaluate whether the teachings make sense to you or not. And that is also where then the questions and discussions during our classes are also helpful. It helps to stimulate our mind to ask questions, to analyze, to think about it. So the next stage is thinking about what has been presented, analyzing it and thinking about it. And then the third stage is actually meditation, meditating on it. So in accordance to our Buddhist tradition, a real wisdom is gained only when you actually put it into practice. Now, meditation may generally sound like just sitting down and quiet and having your eyes quiet and closed and sitting in a rigid posture, but actually there's different aspects of meditation in Buddhism as well. Even analyzing and thinking about it is part of the meditation as well. But even in our daily life, as we think about these topics and how we see it sort of relevant in our everyday lives, is part of like the practice as well. But the retreat day is specifically to help with that, integrate the teachings. Then there's also suggested readings. Now here, I might as well here, before I forget, mention that the Discovering Buddhism modules are, and the program is presented either in a sort of in more academic way, where people who learn about it and study it are looking to seek sort of like a recognition of their studies that they've done, and thus can get what is called a completion card, which means that our organization, when all of the elements have been fulfilled, you've done all of the courses and you've done all the required readings. So here we say, if you're doing it as a way to get a completion card, where you say that I've done the Discovering Buddhism, and you get like a certificate, an actual certificate from the organization, in that sense, then you would have to be doing it with all the requirements, which is not only attending the teaching sessions, but also attending the retreats, and then also doing the required readings, because each module has required readings. But if you're not doing it as a way to get any certificate and recognition of a completion card, then it would be a suggested reading, which would mean that these readings, these books which you will have access to, which Zarina will explain a little bit more later, or it will have information be also on the website, how to access these materials. Well, information will be given to you, I guess, specifically for those who have registered for the Discovering Buddhism, to how to access these reading materials. And it is recommended because if you have extra time at home, and after having listened to the presentation here, when you read it, it will make much more sense. And reading it from different masters or teachers will enhance your understanding. And of course, in a short session and with a limited knowledge of myself, I'm not able to give you a really comprehensive, in-depth understanding of the topic. For me, it's more like just sharing my understanding, whatever I've understood, and that is quite limited, but nevertheless something that I over the years that I have acquired as an understanding from the different teachers. And so that is being presented here in the short time. But then when you do the readings, it can complement that and enhance your understanding. So if you have time and even though you're not doing it as a more like an academic approach and more to get a certificate or a completion card, even if it's a personal interest, readings would be very helpful. So that's why we say that suggested readings. So the modules, as I mentioned earlier, are 13 plus the actually altogether 14, but the 14 is what is called an integrated practice. So when you have done all of the 13 modules, at the end, as a way to really make all of these understandings that you've gained, the knowledge and understanding you've gained from the teachings now, to put it really into practice, the 14th is a suggested integrated, it is called integrated practice, with guidelines of what practices you could do, undertake yourself, which will be quite extensive and quite long and intense practices. But for those who feel inspired and really feel like they want to make that step, initially, many of you who are joining might very well be joining just out of an interest to Buddhism. But then along the way, but some of you might already have a strong inclination that you want to really have a more like a spiritual approach, and in fact, might even feel like you want to consider yourself as a Buddhist. So if that is the case, then the integrated practice will make much sense, because if one wants to consider oneself as a Buddhist, and then it would require for one to do some practices as a Buddhist, so to take some real transformation in one's life. So therefore, the integration practice at the end, the 14th, the last module, it's not even a module. I don't know if we'll call it a module, but it's called integrated practices. Would be something that you would choose to do. So 13 modules. And one of the suggested questions here is, can one study separate modules? Yeah, of course, for those of you who are joining from the beginning, it will be an appropriate way to join, because each of the topics are sort of starts from the basics, such as to give you, maybe here I might even actually mention the modules. So the first one is mind and its potential. So basically, all of the Buddhist studies, and the real, how should we say, the real benefits from the Buddhist studies and understandings is a way to transform one's mind, is a way to, it's a transformative spiritual path, which is primarily focused on transforming one's mind. So in understand how that works and how that happens, one needs to have an understanding of the mind. What is mind according to Buddhism? Because it's one word, but with that one word, you might have different understandings of what it means, depending even scientifically and physiologically, you might talk about the mind, which maybe just refers to the brain, but what does it mean in the Buddhist context? So really having an in-depth understanding of what the mind is, and most importantly, what its potential is. Because according to Buddhism, the very fact that we have a mind means that it's got its natural inborn qualities and potentials as well. But if we're not introduced to those qualities and potentials, we might not readily be aware of it, and be able to access it. So it's like having someone being given a computer with so many programs on it, but not knowing anyway how to access them. So that's similar to that. Like we have a mind, but we need to know like what are the great potential we have with the mind. But on the same token, also there's some negative sides of the, just by having the mind, it means we have also these negative emotions, such as anger, greed, pride, jealousy, and so forth. So these are also things we need to understand in depth, both the positive qualities and the negative sides, as a way to get rid of the negative from our minds. That is why we need to understand that mind. The mind in its potential is the first module, followed by how to meditate. So having understood what the mind is and its potential, then it makes more sense to learn some basic meditation techniques. So that's the next module, followed by presenting the path. The presenting the path is specifically the path metaphorically used, a spiritual path, which means an inner development path that leads us in Buddhism, what we call the ultimate goal of enlightenment. And enlightenment is a goal which is possible for anyone who seeks it. And that is the ultimate potential of the mind. So what does that journey consist of? What does the path consist of? So that is what is being presented. Of course, all in a brief, so we have, as I mentioned earlier, 4 or 5 sessions. So it's kind of like giving you really sort of like a good basic understanding of what the Buddhist path insists of. Then if for them, having presented the path to enlightenment, then it will make sense to, if one is interested in following, pursuing that path and going further, then it'll be natural that we want to have a qualified teacher that can guide us on that path. So that's the next module after that, is specifically about the spiritual teacher. A spiritual teacher in our tradition requires having certain qualities and certain qualifications, we could say, inner qualifications, external qualifications, and then also along with the qualities and qualifications of a spiritual teacher, for someone who's earnestly seeking a spiritual path, what are the qualities that an inner seeker also needs? Because just the spiritual path, which requires in-depth study and understanding and meditation and practice, cannot be taken just sort of like simply and lighthearted by anyone. So someone needs to have some sort of dedication and some sort of keen interest. So the spiritual teacher is the next, is that module, then followed by a reality that we all need to face, that we will face eventually, which is part of our human existence, and as part of our natural existence was to be born in this world. One of the natural consequences, natural sort of part of our existence that we need to be facing at some time is what we call death. So what does death mean according to the Buddhism? And death, and specifically according to the Buddhist beliefs and understandings, rebirth, what happens after death. So death and rebirth is the next. And then karma, all about karma, is the next module after that, followed by refuge in the 3 jewels. So introducing what the 3 jewels are. Basically, this is a point where, if someone is sort of like on the wondering if one can consider oneself a Buddhist or not, or one wishes to become a Buddhist, and what does it require if one's earnestly seeking to follow this Buddhist path, then it requires one to take refuge in the 3 jewels, which is namely the Buddha, the Dhamma, and Sangha. So what does that mean to take refuge? That will be explained in more detail. Then followed by that is the 8th module, is establishing a daily practice. So if a student has come so far and their interest has maintained so far, then they might be really interested in having to implement their understanding they've gained so far into a daily practice. So that's why there'll be guidelines of how to establish a daily practice. Then at that point, there'll be more explanations of what may seem like rituals, like making offerings on the altar with either water bowls or flowers, whatever it may be offering, or doing prostrations, the significance of it, and doing prayers. We have often here at the Ishinyingu, we have also prayer evenings, such as the Tara pujas and medicine pujas. So what does it mean? What does all this mean? How does it relate to one's spiritual development? So those things will be explained in establishing daily practice. Then followed by the 9th module, which is on samsara and nirvana. What does samsara mean? What does nirvana mean? Followed by the next module, which is how to develop bodhichitta. Again, a word which, if you're not familiar with now, which will become much more clear later, but basically bodhichitta is loosely translated as the awakening mind. Basically, it's based on developing love and compassion for all beings, or based on developing love and compassion for all beings. When one generates this keen aspiration to achieve enlightenment so that one can benefit all sentient beings, then that state of mind which is developed is basically what is called awakening mind or bodhicitta. So more specific explanations on how to develop that mind and what it requires, definition of bodhicitta and so forth will be explained in that module, followed by transforming problems. One may think that maybe this module should come first. How to transform all the difficulties in life, first of all. But it's presented here because once one makes a resolve to follow the spiritual path, there can be more specific problems that one may face and challenges one may face, which may be not like normal challenges. Right now, our challenges are maybe more mundane, like how to get good jobs and maintain one's jobs, and of course relationship problems and so forth. But those are what we would say like more mundane problems in comparison to the challenges one may face when one follows the spiritual path. It's not an easy path, I must say, from the limited experience I have. Many challenges can come up. So how to use those challenges and transform means a problem is only a problem when one sees it that way. When one has an attitude to a problem as only a problem, then that's how it presents itself. But these are trainings, there's methods in the Buddhist teachings where you can begin to see it, change one's attitude to see it not as a problem, but as an opportunity to further one's practice, to develop oneself. So when it is understood and seen as not as a challenge, but rather as an opportunity to develop oneself. For example, one of the transforming problems, it says that one develops an attitude of seeing one's enemy as one's best teacher. Now, in a mundane sense, that may seem like a ridiculous remark. Why would you see your enemy or someone who causes you pain and distress to be seen you as your teacher? But in a spiritual context, it becomes very true. Without someone who causes you distress and problems, you'll never know how much patience you have developed, which is one of the essential qualities we need to develop on the path. So like that, and how much compassion one has developed. Well, normally we would say like, yeah, I'm quite a compassionate person, but when under challenge, when someone challenges you, like your enemy, then that's a real test to see how much compassion we have. So transforming problems really consists of all of these methods and techniques. Then following that module, that was module 11. Now 11.12 is wisdom of emptiness, and many of you might have already heard if you have been interested in Buddhism, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, the word emptiness. So what does emptiness mean? What basically, in a short sense, emptiness is basically a word which is used, the term which is used to describe the natural reality of all existence. So basically penetrating and really look into, how we perceive reality as versus to what reality really is. Yeah. So that is what emptiness is about, the wisdom of emptiness, which is an essential part in a Buddhist practice and understanding. Then followed by that is the last study module or presentation module and study module, which is Introduction to Tantra. And being from the Tibetan tradition, Tantra is an integral part of the whole path, part of the path. So up until this point, the 12th module, it would be known as the Sutric path. Practices and studies that you can do, which are summarized into what they call the Sutric teachings of the Buddha. But then the Buddha gave teachings on a higher level, now more, some may call esoteric, but basically on a more personal level, how to make that path even quicker to reach enlightenment. And so that is what is being introduced in the Tantra, introduction to Tantra. And then the 14th is the special integration experience, which involves practices such as undertaking I'll just read here from the explanation, undertaking intensive practices of purification, a 10-day Lamrim course retreat. Lamrim is basically the stages of the path to enlightenment, so doing an actual course or retreat on that. 3 Nyungnes, this is again quite an extensive intensive practices, Nyingma retreats, and then it creates the inner conditions needed to gain the realizations on the path in enlightenment. The purification practice entail 100,000 prostrations. So maybe we shouldn't mention this to scare people away. And the 35 Buddhas and the 100,000 long Bodhisattva mantra. So all of this will make sense if your interest and your development has lasted so far. Then all of this will start to make sense, much more sense at the time when it is being presented, or actually doing what we call establishing a daily practice. All of these elements of what these practices involve will be explained, and that's when we would basically, it's a personal choice. So that covers basically the modules. I think I talked a little bit about how the class is designed, the teaching with question and answers, and then discussion, and break for fika. We all have that. And then, so I think that covers basic information about the modules that we are presenting in this series of courses that we do. And then, most importantly, for those who are interested, and you're here because you have an interest, take it real lightheartedly. You may not be so keen in taking, considering yourself a Buddhist yet, or even taking these doing the practice elements in a serious way. But whatever you do receive here, and it's not a requirement at all, you can take these, do these studies here out of an interest. And at a certain point, you would feel yourself whether you want to continue, whether it makes sense to you or not, And don't rely just on the presentator here, myself, because my understanding and knowledge, as I said, is quite limited. And also there's something about whether you can connect with someone, others or not. Even though I don't have much understanding and knowledge, maybe some people really relate to what I say, and that will bring them an interest to investigate further and develop themselves further. And the help is with the suggested readings. So you do the suggested readings, and then that can then enhance your understandings. So basically, take it with a light-hearted approach. There might be a lot of information here in as a whole, but from all of this, you might get something which can really relate to in your life, which can help you basically to have a better life. Because ultimately, we are in a tradition where we're trying to really access the whole range of the Buddha's teachings, and that's why there's a lot of information. But that doesn't mean that each individual has to try to, get all of this information before they can see some benefit in their life or can have some transformative experiences in life. Even 1 or 2 aspects of these teachings you could relate to, and can really take you, find you the sort of answers that you are seeking in your life, very, very possibly. So basically, if one module made sense to you, go on to the next module. If the first module was somewhat maybe made sense, but you're not really quite sure, try the next module and see if that takes you any further. And just really keep it simple to yourselves, and continue at your own pace and your own interest. But it will. What I want to say is that although it doesn't make maybe much sense right away, all of it, it might start to all make sense. It's almost like presenting a big puzzle, and then sometimes when someone else is making a puzzle and you don't see the cover box of it, it may all just seem like random pieces with small colors and shapes, and doesn't make much sense at all. But as they're put together slowly, then the bigger picture becomes very clear and very vivid, and you can start to appreciate the effort that had been gone into putting these small pieces together. So that's it's like really like this puzzle of a map leading to enlightenment, or in our everyday life sense, a better person, more fulfillment in what one does, and better relationships with others, beginning with our own family or close members, close and dear ones. So all of this can start to happen as we, take our study and interest a little bit further.